Okay, welcome back then. First quarterly, or I suppose second quarterly report, depending what way you look at it, of 1855. We're in early April, and let's have a look at the unfolding sort of military conflicts that we have running. So our insurgency in Aden continues, or Aden is down here, isn't it? Zoom out a bit, here we go. Continues. Now, our attempt to move south to lift the siege at Aden itself, the port, has not come off. Furthermore, the port now is totally breached. The actual fortress that we built there is totally breached. Because it's an industrial fortress, we do have somewhat more sizable forces there than we sort of would otherwise have. Where we have a pre-industrial kind of large fortress. That said, the Yemeni forces that are besieging them are fairly numerous. So the hope is that they kind of hold out really for another month or so. Famous last words. Our attempt to move south, I mean, despite the fact that we have had overwhelming success in the field in the last 6 months against the Yemenis, they've still got some fight in them. Absolutely still got some fight in them. Ismail Pasha's attempt to move south was pretty heavily rebuffed. You can see he's fallen back. He's sustained some losses. His force is in a pretty serious state of disorganization. Supplies are getting a bit low. The main issue of supplies now is that our main port is in Aden itself. We don't have a port in Hodeidah anymore, so we do need to lift the siege on this port. I think one option is going to be actually to move Zarif Pasha's division down. It's a 12-day march, so we're going to commit to that, and we're going to keep Ismail Pasha in Taiz for the time being, just to kind of organise a bit of recovery. We can actually look at the combat report of that. We lost 3,000 men. And bear in mind, these are not really large forces that we have at our disposal. There's only 2 rounds of combat. I don't think it was quite enough for Zaif Mustafa's force to actually kind of move on a kind of sound to the guns effect. So not great. We inflicted 2,000 casualties, destroyed one of their regiments, but it wasn't enough. Unfortunately, the march from Taiz to Aden, I should have held back in retrospect because it was made in fairly heavy weather, which slowed the pace of the march. It was actually a 16-day march, which carried us over into kind of 2 turns. Often those kind of long marches, they don't end well. If a force is going to march for more than 2 weeks and then engage in a fairly serious sustained combat, you have to have overwhelming numerical superiority for it to come off, really. And of course, the Yemenis are sitting there in kind of entrenched positions. I mean, with emplacements, and the advantage of having been in the same location for a period of time, essentially. Anyway, Zaif Pasha is not activated, so we can't engage in a kind of any sort of big offensive. We're set to kind of hold at all cost if he is attacked. The hope is that if he gets there within 12 days, at the very least, if they try and move to assault Aden, maybe his force can kind of come into play. But yeah, that's all for now in terms of the Yemeni situation. Sana'a is secured. Hadramaut, we can see a couple of regular columns moving into Hadramaut. We don't have a great amount of intel on the character of those forces. The likelihood is if Zaif Pasha moves south, that column is probably going to then head towards Sana'a, and we don't have a fortress there this time. So, food for thought. Might reconsider that. We'll hold on that just for a moment. A bit of a stream of consciousness moment there. Now, our intervention, which seems like a wild ahistorical ploy, but I would argue isn't, has come off really, really well. Osman Pasha successfully engaged the Venezuelan forces. He launched an assault. It wasn't done in one turn. It was done over a period of about a month. And the Venezuelan forces were somewhat more numerous than I anticipated. They had about 30,000 troops bottled up in the city itself, but they were no match for our, sort of much more professional army. It's an army corps. It has an integrated HQ asset, a stellar commander at its head. They did actually have a commander. They had a commander, but he wasn't up to much. And even though we were actually outnumbered, they just weren't a match to us. We kind of destroyed their forces. In fact, Osman is up for promotion now. We'll hold back on that for the time being. That puts us in a fairly strong position to dictate some peace terms to Venezuela, and we're going to do just that. We've offered peace. The peace is they pay reparations of a very small amount of money over a period of 4 years, and it's just a bit of income. It's a trickle of kind of income. Gives us a nice bit of prestige. My anxiety is that concluding peace with them before they conclude peace with Britain will cause some kind of problems. I don't think it will. We'll see. But I'm not going to stay at war with them for a really long period of time, hemorrhage national morale, for no reason, for some kind of, the British are very well placed to deal with this situation themselves, and, they do have a force there also in any case. So once we leave Caracas in the event of a peace deal, I'm going to move Osman actually onto the transports in case that peace deal goes through. This territory will then fall to the British almost instantly, which I'm happy with that, absolutely fine with that, and that'll put them in a position then to kind of arrange their own peace deal. That said, in terms of military matters, we kind of, we rolled up the small insurgency that got to Damascus. We're now heading this division back south to Aqaba to try and. There doesn't appear to be any forces there, but we're struggling to get kind of military control of this region. So we're going to send some forces to Aqaba and try and sort of get that area resecured. We received reports of an insurgency in kind of sort of Dubai, Bahrain kind of area. There's no issues with regard to military control there. We have a colonial fortress at Dubai itself and also at Qatar. And it may be the case that this has happened kind of in the interior. We'll keep an eye on that situation. These are protectorates. They're not formal colonies. Even though we have military control, at some point we are going to look to move these into full colonial status, integrate them properly into the empire. We'll also look to do that with Kuwait, I think, in the next kind of year or two. State revenue is beginning to kind of pick up now. And in terms of our sort of main state expenditure, we're at 98% now for Percussion Cup muskets. That's really, really good. And that's basically our kind of next generation infantry soldier is going to be secured, really the next couple of turns. And that will release 50 state revenue per turn, which will mean that we'll start building up state revenue nice and quickly again. I think the first thing we're going to be looking at is probably an investment in education to improve our education system, try and drive up literacy, which is sitting around 27%. Bear in mind that 5 years ago it was at 31%, so illiteracy is increasing in the country. It's the opposite to what one would hope for, so that needs to be addressed. Economically, let me just flick through any other reports to make sure there isn't anything. Okay, there is something really interesting. And that is, of course, that we now have, it's an economic thing. We have access to early railroad from this time. And that's really the last tool that we needed. We now have all the kind of tools for basically the early part of the Industrial Revolution, which is early railroads. These railroads will gradually improve over time as we get other kinds of technologies. To really link up our cities. We've got the Industrial Revolution, we've got the centralization of the means of production, large industrial factories, agricultural kind of capitalist agricultural enterprises, and now we're going to have railroads to begin linking these towns and cities up. And the first stretch of railroad we'll build now. A historical moment in early April 1855, the Ottoman Empire begins the first railroad development in Constantinople. It's 800 capital, 31 steel, 26 units of manufactured goods. We have all of those things, and it's going to take about a year, basically. So here it begins, and the second one we'll look to build in Smyrna. The second one will cost a bit more because the terrain there is a bit tougher, and then after that we'll look to push through from Constantinople, Adrianople, Kavala, and of course Salonika, as mentioned in the last video, and sort of develop the kind of tobacco belt, if you like, of the empire. But that's a really exciting development. It's something I've been waiting on for a long time. It took a bit longer than expected, but we've got early railroad, and then of course, with the next sort of by the next report, we will have percussion cap muskets in the bag as well, and they are two very significant kind of developments. And then after that, we're going to look to try and build up a bit of state revenue, build up a really nice kind of nice chest to provide us with a bit of security, and begin to make some kind of government level investments, some kind of macro investments in different kind of areas. I should say that very generally the economy in the last quarter has slackened off. Exports really sitting sort of, on average about 10 units of manufactured goods now. Tobacco, nitrates, dyes, fruits, fish, cereals, these things are all fairly solid, and these are the results that have been yielded from our early agricultural development. It means that we've always got a nice bit of income coming from exports. We produce those things in spades. But we can see in terms of the total numbers of units exported, down ever so slightly, yielding about 138, with domestic market sales sitting around the same. One important development with the domestic market sales is a first kind of exploit is a vineyard. These are large kind of modern capitalist vineyards. They're not the kind of quaint sort of classical things that we have in mind. These are large sort of plantations, and that now provides us with consistent access to wine. We have other vineyards being developed also in Rhodes, and I think we had another one. No, we don't. We have a fruits plantation. I think in the mainland we'll focus on fruits plantation, and the kind of Greek islands will look to develop vineyards. Possibly we'll develop vineyards at Latakia as well also. And that provides us now with constant domestic production of wine. And for the time, well, for the foreseeable future, that's just going to be for domestic consumption, of course. There's, we're not going to be producing this in any kind of quantity that we're going to be exporting it, not for some time anyway. Not to open up an enormous kind of can of worms, but wine was consumed in the Ottoman Empire. There were various attempts to introduce alcohol prohibition, which is not unique or specific to Islamic societies. Of course, the United States tried to do this in the 1920s without much success, and that was also the case incidentally in the Ottoman Empire. The various attempts to implement prohibition never really came off. And even when it was sort of enforced at different times, typically you could still buy alcohol in sherbet houses and this sort of thing. Sherbet is where, in English, we get the word sherbet from for this powdery stuff. The powdery stuff was actually used to make a kind of popular drink, which I think is still drunk in Turkey today. So it was a kind of soft drink, but alcohol was sold in sherbet houses even during Prohibition. So we want to make sure that we can kind of capitalize on that and get sort of start getting sort of domestic consumption of wine up. It would obviously for a period of time be a almost a kind of luxury commodity of some sorts. But that's good news. We've had the completion then of a canned goods factory in Sinop. We've got a second one in construction in Bursa, which is nearing completion, and we have a textile shop currently being built in Smyrna, and that's pretty much it for our kind of manufactories. For the time being, we're going to put brakes on developing the productive forces, save for agricultural enterprises. We'll continue exploiting vineyards, I think, and looking at kind of fruit plantations, because they're things that, we produce enough fruits that we have an export market for it, but we can't really produce enough to meet export demand, so it makes sense to try and increase. And they're also very, very, very kind of cheap sort of manufactories. These are very kind of cheap agricultural enterprises. But the main focus for the time being is going to be railroads now. Railroads is going to be the main focus for the next couple of years. We want to link up Constantinople to Salonika. We want railroads in Smyrna. Ultimately, we're going to push these railroads through Bursa into Izmit, which will increase the yield of these agricultural enterprises, which is of course an opium plantation and a fruit plantation, and of course our sort of fishing ports in Smyrna. So we'll have a railroad going from Smyrna to basically Constantinople, through to Adrianople, Kavala, Salonika. That's going to be the first stretch of railroad, and then after that we'll start looking at kind of strategic development of the interior. Railroads do use coal. We are starting to get to the point now, incredibly, despite the fact that we have all these factories, where the amount of coal that's consumed by the economy is about the same as what's sort of being produced by our kind of guilds, if you like. So we're going to start looking at kind of serious exploitation of the coal deposits that we have in the kind of interior, really, of the Turkish interior. Also in Smyrna we have here, and also we have good access to coal in Bulgaria, Kosovo, and even Bosnia and Herzegovina up at Bihać. So we'll be looking to exploit those at some point, but ultimately long term we're probably going to be a coal importing nation. That said, we'll see what happens, see if we kind of we might exploit some other kind of coal deposits. That is pretty much it. The only other thing I'm not sure if I mentioned in an earlier video, so I shall do so now, and that is that we had access to a new military unit. They're very cheap field hospital units, a really, really good kind of service asset unit that allows for some degree of trickle back. It means that from now on, if this large force commanded by Omar Pasha, the legendary Omar Pasha, sustains losses, this field hospital unit, which was a development of the Crimean War, will allow for a sort of degree of trickle back. We've built two units. One is in Osman Pasha's army. The other is at Erzurum, in the fortress at Erzurum, with Abdul Karim Nadir. And one thing I should say is that his force is now beginning to kind of train and develop these militia corps into regular formations. We can begin to see now more headway has been made with converting these sort of these regiments, these elements, into regular forces. And with the first militia corps, it's almost now entirely been turned into a professional force, which is a really good development. In terms of expansion of the army, we're going to hold off for the time being. We don't want to do anything to rock the boat too much, but we will long-term look to do that. But state revenue is going to be tied up with macro investments, things like education, and also beginning to look to overhaul the fortification system that we have in the European theatre, and also on the Eastern Front. That's it for the time being. The next report will be June, July time, 1855 this year. We'll keep you updated on any kind of reports or if anything happens in the meantime that's an emergency, of course, I'll do a special sort of report. But if things carry on as they are, I shall see you in June, July 1855. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.